The Dark Ages, Myths, Mysteries, and Reality. Welcome to an intriguing dive into one of history's most misunderstood periods, the Dark Ages. Often portrayed as a time of chaos, ignorance, and societal stagnation, this era is shrouded in misconceptions. But what actually happened between the fall of the Roman Empire and the birth of the Renaissance? Was it truly as bleak as history textbooks like to claim? Let's start with the name itself, the Dark Ages. This term emerged during the Renaissance, coined by scholars who wanted to contrast their own culture's achievements with what they believed to be a period of intellectual decline. These thinkers depicted the preceding centuries as a dark and dormant time in opposition to their own flourishing art, science, and philosophy. However, historians today agree that the description is biased and oversimplified. The label reflects not the actual state of the era, but the perception of Renaissance thinkers trying to elevate their age as a cultural rebirth. In truth, the so-called Dark Ages was a period of transition, adaptation, and many notable achievements, despite the challenges faced during those times. To understand this period better, we must go back to its starting point, the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE. This catastrophic event saw Rome's power crumble under the weight of internal corruption, economic instability, and repeated invasions by Germanic tribes like the Visigoths and Vandals. The collapse led to a breakdown in centralized governance across much of Europe. Trade networks faltered, urban centers declined, and power fragmented into localized feudal systems. At first glance, this paints a picture of societal regression, but there's more to the story than meets the eye. Communities adapted to these changes, establishing smaller, self-sufficient economies. Local rulers emerged, providing protection and structure to their regions. While the grandeur of Rome was gone, new forms of governance and social organization began to take shape. One of the biggest misconceptions is that the Dark Ages were marked by intellectual stagnation. While it's true that Europe faced significant challenges, knowledge was far from lost. Monasteries became centers of learning, preserving and copying key works of philosophy, science, and theology. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire in the East carried forward much of the Roman tradition. Cities like Constantinople thrived as hubs of learning, art, and culture. Classical literature, legal systems, and innovations from Rome and Greece were maintained and, in some cases, expanded upon. Though progress may have unfolded more quietly during this era, it was by no means absent. The period saw remarkable developments in architecture, education, and innovation. The most iconic example is Gothic architecture, which began to flourish in the later Middle Ages but saw its roots develop in earlier centuries. Cathedrals like Notre Dame in Paris demonstrate a fusion of engineering brilliance and artistic vision, producing awe-inspiring spaces that still stand today. This era also saw the seeds of modern universities. Centers of learning like the Cathedral School of Notre Dame in Paris laid the groundwork for higher education as we know it today. Philosophy, theology, and early science courses were among the subjects taught, slowly expanding Europe's intellectual horizons. Even in the realm of technology, humanity didn't stand still. Breakthroughs like the heavy plow and windmills revolutionized agriculture, improving food production and quality of life. These innovations helped stabilize societies, allowing people to focus on pursuits beyond survival. Despite the challenges of the period, individuals emerged who left a lasting legacy. One of the most prominent was Charlemagne, also known as Charles the Great. As king of the Franks and later emperor of the Romans, Charlemagne worked to unify much of Europe under a cohesive set of laws, fostering education and culture in the process. Then there was Boethius, a philosopher who bridged the classical and medieval worlds. His seminal work, The Consolation of Philosophy, was widely read and influential during the Middle Ages. Another trailblazing figure was Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th-century abbess, writer, composer, and natural scientist. She broke barriers with her profound contributions to science, medicine, and music, and her work continues to inspire today. So, what was daily life actually like during this time? For most people, life revolved around subsistence farming. The majority of the population lived in rural areas, growing crops, raising livestock, and trading goods locally. Religion played a central role. The church dominated both spiritual and political life, guiding morality and governance. Pagan traditions persisted in some regions, blending with Christian practices to form unique cultural traditions. Recurring threats like Viking raids, plagues, and food shortages made life uncertain for many. However, communities adapted, and out of these hardships arose practices and alliances that laid the foundation for future stability. Now, let's widen our lens beyond Europe to see the global influences on the so-called Dark Ages. During this time, the Islamic Golden Age was flourishing in the Middle East. Cities like Baghdad and Cordoba acted as epicenters of knowledge, producing advances in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and architecture. Much of this knowledge eventually filtered into Europe. Translation centers, like the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, preserved and enhanced the works of ancient Greece and Rome. Arabic scholars not only translated these texts but expanded upon them, providing new insights and theories. It was through this network of cultural exchange that Europe would later gain access to important concepts like algebra, astronomy, and medical practices, forming a key part of its intellectual revival in the later Middle Ages and Renaissance. At this point, we've revealed how misleading the term Dark Ages truly is. Far from being an entirely stagnant time, this period saw important strides in culture, technology, and governance. It was a time of reinvention and resilience, as societies transitioned away from centralized empires toward localized systems that would ultimately evolve into the modern nations of Europe. It's worth noting that every era has its challenges, and while the Dark Ages faced invasions, diseases, and social upheaval, remarkable progress emerged within those constraints. Comparing this period to later, Golden Ages, is unfair and robs it of its rightful place in history. One of the most valuable lessons the Dark Ages teaches us is to look beyond surface-level labels. This era, far from being devoid of brilliance, holds stories of resilience, adaptability, and ingenuity. It set the foundations for much of what we benefit from today, whether in architecture, education, or the preservation of knowledge. History is rarely as dark or golden as it seems, and the layers within every era reveal nuance, innovation, and progress. So, what other periods might we be understating or misunderstanding? The Dark Ages remind us to question historical narratives and find light even in the shadows of history. Thank you for joining us on this journey to uncover the mysteries of the Dark Ages. Remember, history is always more fascinating than our first impression. It's up to us to uncover the truth.